Yeah, Hema. So Hema will start off with a talk on Dali and surrealism in his
If you could just enable screen sharing, darling, I would be much obliged.
Okay, one sec.
पूरा control पे रखा हुआ है Hema.
Off you go.
All right then.
It's all yours.
Okay, so what's happening basically is that my okay, so what has happened is my computer had updated to the newer operating system, and after that I had not opened Zoom. So just give me a few minutes.
Yeah, take it.
I'm leaving and rejoining, okay?
And my talk, it's about sort of started off from a couple of articles I read about the Calcutta police force and how an interesting man in that thing. So I was thinking there are several Calcuttans or former Calcuttans who might be interested in this. So yeah, Prasad, Muthu sir. Ravi is also, I think, part of that gang, no? Oh, Bini also, is it?
I got hooked to a Calcutta girl. That's
oh, so many people from, oh, that's interesting.
That is me.
Well, what do you know? Common, half the people over here seem to have some Calcutta roots. Anyway, that should be interesting.
Let's try again.
Oh, okay.
So, okay, it's screen sharing going on, right?
Yep.
Yes.
All right. So, I think I actually first saw one of Dali's paintings. I think it came around on WhatsApp or somewhere on the internet. And it's very gripping, his pictures. I had no idea who Dali was, but the picture appealed to me. So then that's when I started, looking up more of his pictures and started studying him. Well, not actually studying him, but looking at his paintings. This is titled, he's one of the masters of surrealism. It's a genre of painting. Basically, it means, literally, it actually means something which is above reality. So they used to initially call it supranatural, or, then they felt it is better to call it super real or something above reality. And so the name surrealism was coined. This movement came about somewhere in the early part of the 20th century, around World War I, soon after World War I. So there was a lot of communism coming, more and more people who are anarchists, atheists, fighting the established system. So for them, they needed a outlet. So surrealism is what they all, they liked in different forms of culture, art, music, poetry, even films. So this French poet and critic called André Breton, soon after the First World War, he's the one who, although the term surrealism was already there, he's the one who kind of wrote a surrealism manifesto, as in, what they are supposed to do as rebels and the ones who don't walk the beaten path, who do everything upside down and twisted, and nothing is what it seems. So into that school of thought, came Dali and adopted it for his own, amongst a whole lot of other painters also. But in 20th century, latter half 20th century, this guy really made waves because of, as we go through the talk, you will see, he was loud, extraordinarily loud and borderline crazy, probably fully crazy. and also supremely talented. So that's how you see his painting, the way he saw things, not like a normal person with a staid and standard brain would think. So let's just delve into the surreal world of Salvador Dali. A few of the things in here are a little bit X-rated, but I will try to keep it as good as possible. Okay, slides not moving. Okay, fine, got it. So this painting actually Murli sir showed us when he took his class on paintings. It's called the sir, what is it called? Persistence of time. There is Dr.
Persistence of memory.
The persistence of memory. Oh yeah, it's right here, and I didn't see it. The persistence of memory. It's so this was, as you can see, it's all sorts of weird imagery going on here. So the thing about surrealism is a whole lot of it is open to interpretation, and things are twisted out of shape. As you can see, the time clocks lying there. One of the interpretations of this, people believe, is that he was impressed with the theory of relativity, which was around at that time during Einstein's time, and he was trying to capture that in this images of the fluid clocks. There is also a face here in the foreground, a prominent nose, which causes people to believe that it's one of Dali's self-portraits. And it has also got a kind of like a mollusk-like a feel to it, soft and boogie mass. And the scene here is that of a Catalonian seaside, which is where he's from, his hometown. You can see the harsh cliffs and the sea right there. There is a dark shadow looming here. And this here is an olive tree. You can see that there are some insects on the watch. It signifies ants. I mean, it shows ants, which signifies death and decay. So a whole lot of imagery. Even if you don't interpret it, the scene itself is very stark. And, to each his own, you can, different people react to it differently. And that is the whole point of surrealistic paintings. And there is, so that's the thing about Dali's painting. It just captures your eye and, it grips you. This one, for instance, this is called the Invisible Afghan, with the apparition on the beach of the face of Garcia Lorca. Garcia Lorca is a very important player in Dali's life. At the time of his life, he was just one of his, he was just known to be one of his friends from his student days. But later on, there have been letters which have come out, and which points to the fact that he may be something much more than just a friend to Dali. We don't know exactly what their equation was. And really, when it comes to Dali, you cannot put his relationships into any bracket, into any form of definition, or just like his painting, his relationships don't have any structure. So here you can see even the word surrealism is sort of illustrated in it. It's an Afghan horse, just lines here, hazy lines here. And then here, there are two people sitting here, but they are also the eyes of this face. And this face is that of Garcia, his very close friend from his university days. Garcia had a very prominent chin, and he's managed to depict that here. And this kind of depiction, and it's on a beach in Catalonia, in his hometown. So it's very, striking, his pictures. And there are always, two kinds of, interpretation to it. Now, if you look over here, you could actually see an eye, a forehead, and a nose. So here's a face, is it like a satanic face? It could be. The sky is clear. the clouds are hazy. Some people crazy enough might even see some shapes in it, although I don't. So things like that. So very, surrealistic painting. What can I say? Coming to the next one. So a little bit about his background. He was born in 1904 in a small seaside town called Figueres in the province of Catalonia, which is about an hour's ride on a high-speed train from Barcelona. And that is the train we took. I think in 17, luckily for me, the World Congress of Cardiology held their conference in Barcelona. I had a talk there, and my whole family, extended family, trooped along with me. But we had a great time into the conference. But I knew Figueres was Dali's birthplace, his hometown, and a large museum which he himself furnished, designed, and established over there. So for me, it was a big draw. So we headed off to Figueres in the high-speed train, and we were wandering around the town, and that's when I took this picture. There is pretty much nothing in that town except for his museum, which is called the Dali Theatre Museum. It used to be a theatre, and then it fell into it was a ruined little old theatre building, and Dali took it up, renovated it. He's got this very typical huge sculptures of eggs. So the walls of the museum have got giant eggs on top. You can recognize this building as from far away when you walk into the town. And there, towards the last years of his life, he actually lived there in a separate quarters, away from where the people used to visit. And he insisted that when he dies, he should be buried there. So he's actually, his body, his mortal remains are buried in a crypt in the Dali Theatre Museum. This is the atrium. As soon as you enter the museum, you see all these figures there. Dali was quite, was a child prodigy. He had his first public showing at the age of 14 in Figueres, and people appreciated his talent right there. And then he joined the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in Madrid at the age of 17. He was always very precocious, and he used to study art a lot, look at the masters. Initially, he was, while he was a student in Madrid, he happened to visit Paris, and there he met with Pablo Picasso because he was heavily influenced by Cubism and really was quite inspired by Picasso's work. So he went and met Picasso, and the story goes that he went and told Picasso that I have come here before going and visiting the Louvre. And Picasso said, yeah, that's right. That's the order in which you should go, Not very well known for modesty, I think, these guys. So he visited with Picasso, had conversations, and then I guess went on to visit the Louvre. Dali, although as unconventional as he is, was actually very heavily influenced by the Renaissance masters. He, although his art was surreal, he based it on the art of the old masters. He was very, influenced by Da Vinci's paintings, Diego Velázquez. These is a Spanish Renaissance master. So he would take the originals from there and give it a surreal twist, as you can see in some of the works that I'm going to show you. Now, Dali was a loud character. So all his work is characterized by that loudness of his exhibitionism in material wealth, in his appearance, everything. And a lot of his work have very overt sexuality in them, and often dysfunctional. Now, the reason for that, they say, is that at those times, see, his father was a government clerk, used to deal with law papers and notary, that kind of a thing. Quite influential in Catalonia. And his mother was from a family of business people who actually had a very artistic temperament, and she encouraged young Dali. She used to give him clay models to paint, play with, and encourage him to sculpt, things like that. But his father was a very strict kind of guy, and he didn't want Dali to be promiscuous. And towards that end, he when Dali was a young boy or a young adult, he used to put out pictures of the medical books, or health pictures of diseases that can afflict one through sexually transmitted diseases, through sex. So he apparently saw these pictures, and he was very deeply scarred. The other thing that he hated was insects, particularly grasshoppers. So these, and he was by all accounts a very sensitive lad. So these things, affected the young Dali very profoundly. And they say that maybe that is one of the reasons for his dysfunctional sexuality, about, that we see coming through in his work, and very much so in his life. Just to go back. So this is his depiction of Venus. The original is there in the Louvre, and you can see the top part is all pretty much representative of the original. But come here, you can see all sorts of ghouls and monsters, on the pedestal. So this is what I was talking about earlier when I said that he would take the masters and give his own twist to this art. So talking about exhibitionism, this is what I was saying. This is a quote. Every morning upon awakening, I experience a supreme pleasure, that of being Salvador Dali. And I ask myself, wonderstruck, what prodigious thing will he do today, this Salvador Dali? That was his persona. And this is this very typical mustache which he grew, and took extreme pains with, waxed it up to defeat gravity. Unnatural, like everything else. So this is Gala and Dali, his long-time partner, wife actually. Dali was, I think, 24 or around thereabouts when he first met Gala. Gala is originally Russian. She was at that time married to another surrealistic painter, and visited him in his house in one of the seaside towns of Spain. I forget the name now. And they took a immediate fancy to each other. And when her husband left, Gala stayed back. And I guess this is all a community of artists who move around quite a lot. And Gala stayed on with Dali for another 6 decades or so. They were together still in their 80s and 90s, and till Gala passed away, I think probably she was in her 90s, because there is a 10-year gap between them, Gala being the older one. It is very interesting how they stayed on. Maybe it was her tolerance of his paraphilia, of his weirdness. What was it that cemented these two, for their lifetime? We don't know. But by all accounts, it was never a conventional union. One thing was certain, Dali always said that without Gala, Dali is nothing. She fostered his creativity, encouraged it, and Dali, and it appears like Dali could never have reached his heights of creativity without Gala. And you would think that, oh, she's such a nice, sweet lady, but no. Everybody else who knew Gala would say that she was a shrew. She was like a horrible, nasty, loud woman. But somehow, for these two, they had, they were just two parts of a whole, and they never separated. Dali used Gala as a model for one of his famous paintings, the Madonna of Port Licard. the Madonna of Port Ligot. So this again is a depiction of the Mother Mary and child and six angels, which is a often seen painting art by the Renaissance masters. Different people have painted it. It was done by Botticelli, Francesco. A lot of people have painted the same depiction in with different interpretations. Dali has taken this and given it a surrealistic twist. You can see that there is gaps within their bodies, aiming to imply their transcendence. This arch is also very constantly seen in most depictions, and that also is breaking up, showing the atmosphere in between. This is a baby Jesus. So this painting actually, even though it's looking so abnormal and so different from the original Renaissance paintings, but Dali was also deeply religious, and he seriously, he meant it when he painted this. He was not trying to take the mickey out of the painting. He actually showed it to Pope Pius and got his blessings for it. And after that, this painting was exhibited all over the place. And subsequently, he redid it. This was first done in 1945 or 1949. Then again in the 50s, he repainted it again with small differences in the periphery. There were quite a few angels around here, which again was modeled on Gala. So this is Gala's face, which he's picturized the Madonna as. This is yet another painting with religious overtones. I mean, very religious, as you can see. Can you make out the figure here? This is the face, and you can actually see the eyes. One second. The eyes and the eyebrow, lips. So here, arms, the legs here. It's a very interesting painting. I actually got this picture off the net because this painting hangs in the exhibition in Berlin. I was there in the exhibition in Berlin, but there was no photographs allowed inside. So I couldn't take a picture of this from inside the exhibition. And I was so distraught because it's such a striking picture, and I couldn't take a photograph of it. But then I came out, and one of my friends, he found it on the internet and sent it to me. So I got it finally, the Apocalypse of St. John. This was made in a very peculiar way. It was on a copper plate. So he used nails, and he caused this explosion, and the nails flew and hit the copper plate and got embedded in it. And then Dali completed this lines by engraving on it. If you first look at this painting, it's actually quite a large one. So if you stand in front of it, it doesn't occur to you what this is. You are not able to recognize the shape. But then you have to move further away to a distance, and then you suddenly see, Christ emerging soon after his crucifixion. This is another famous painting of his called The Premonition of Civil War. It is also called Soft Construction with Boiled Beams. Down here in the foreground, you can see a lot of boiled beams. It's modeled on Goya's Rise Up and Rise Down. Here you have a satanic figure pulling a person down. Whoever goes up, are bound to fall down. You can see somebody here falling head first down. Another person has fallen down here already. So this is Goya's rise up to fall down. Sorry, to rise up to fall down. And you can see very clearly that this is inspired from this painting. And it's called The Premonition of Civil War because he painted this 6 months before the Spanish Civil War. And as you can see, it's this, a body which is tearing itself apart with a very demonic face there, and it's just killing itself. And some people also see a map of Spain within it. So Dali had these problems with his sexuality. A lot of his work was twisted in that sense. But like I said earlier, he used to also paint about current times, about the socio-political milieu of those times. A lot of his paintings depicted the events occurring around the world. The soft clock, for instance, which he it's around the time of Einstein having propounded the theory of relativity. So this was around the time of the Civil War, except that he foresaw it. So this was painted 6 months before, and then later he told people like about how he saw it happening in the future. See, but Dali was not a very political being, you know. He in the Spanish Civil War, the communists were, you know, they were fighting the right-wing fanatics, and he was he didn't stand with either of them. He just completely stayed out of it, even though his sister was caught and tortured by the rebels. He preferred to just stay out of it. Every time unrest broke out in Spain, war, a strife, he would just he and Gala would just leave and go and stay in New York. And for that, he actually faced quite a lot of flack. But like I said, he wasn't removed from it completely. So this painting, it's called the Raphaelesque Head Exploding. This is, you can see the very beautiful, calm, peaceful face of the Virgin Mary. Again, it's based on Raphael's painting of the Madonna. And in this, he's put this Renaissance master's depiction and put it in the current times. Current times at that time was at the time of the Second World War and the atomic bomb. The wider details are not seen in this picture, but if you look at it up here, you have dark shadows which look like the mushroom clouds following an atomic explosion. The roof is a high domed cupola, which is the Pantheon, with light filtering into the head. And this whole head seems like it's exploding. And you see that it's swirling all these conical objects, rhinoceros horns, it looks like, and that has got very, that's got significance in Dali's world of surrealism, symbol of fertility, there is also a wheelbarrow here in this side, because this is again inspired by another painting where for some reason the paint, I don't remember the name of the painting, but it's a farmer and a woman standing side by side in a field, and there's a wheelbarrow in the background. And for some reason, there is a hint of extreme sexuality about the wheelbarrow. I couldn't make out, but there it is. So that's why Dali has put that also here in this corner. So this is the Raphaelesque head exploding. I think it's a beautiful picture. So these are some of the other wartime sketches that he did. As you can clearly see, this was done during the Second World War. This is probably the Nuremberg trials, the incarceration camps, blood on the battlefield. This is probably a chopper coming to rescue them. I don't think there were choppers there though, right? Anyway, it's a rope ladder. So you can see that even though he didn't actively participate in, publicly decrying war or, like so many other activists did, he would just go to a different shore. But it did affect him, and you can see that in his work. These pictures were all, I took it on my iPhone from his museum in Figueres. There are a lot of such sketches and watercolor paintings over there that he has done. So this just shows again this is towards this, most of these sketches were towards the latter part of his life. A lot of pencil sketches were done, and most of these are housed in the Figueres Museum. You can see the bizarre configuration of the body. Again, it's a lot is open to interpretation. And it's just, if you can make out, this is a face. This is the body. These are the sagging breasts, the buttocks, kneeling down on the cushion, and, phallic structures. It's just meant to shock. And as you can see here, the waxed mustache, it's highly unnatural. Everything about this is unnatural, and everything about this is almost disgusting to see. But it's also striking, and it just grips you, the imagery. I think towards the end, he also went a little crazy. They say that there was a lot of repetition in his sketches, duplication, and crowded, so crowded. And there's so many little details in it that you cannot even catch all of them. This picture I put particularly just to show you how busy and crazy his mind was. Imagine the number of lines, the dots, the scratches. It's just packed into and this is just about the size of an A4 sheet. That's all it is. Those are his pictures. He also had a lot of three-dimensional art installation. This, for instance, this is actually a room in the Dali Museum in Figueres. And I initially didn't even see it. This is like a room. I just went inside here, wandered here, and went out. Because you just saw something sitting here, one sofa and some plastic things, some pictures on the wall. Then Shibu told me, did you climb up on the staircase? And I didn't climb up on the staircase because there was a huge crowd there. I couldn't be bothered. Then he said, no, you have to go there and see it through this, this magnification glass. So then I finally stood in the queue, climbed up the stairs, came here. There is a magnification glass there. And then I looked through it. And what do you see? With the face of Mae West. Mae West, an American actress who was quite the muse for Dali those days. This is just a sofa set here. And this is one of the sofas which is very famous that Dali designed. That's one of the 3D installations in that museum. And this is another one. So that you can see Dr. Pillai standing there watching this Cadillac. And what does this Cadillac do? Well, let's see. You can still see the screen?
Yes, can see it.
So this is called Two Mannequins Rotting in a Taxi Cab. There are slugs all over her. There is music playing inside. That woman is not seen very clearly here. This Cadillac is Dali's own. He donated it to the museum. And people found it so interesting and engrossing that they replicated this again in the US. I think in Florida, somewhere thereabouts. And there it's a different... And there it is a different car. It's a white Rolls Royce, I think. I think it's a Rolls Royce. And you have to put in $1 for it to start. It's called the Raining Taxi, or Mannequins Rotting in a Taxi Cab. Just interesting thing that occurs to him. Crazy fellow. That's me outside the museum in Berlin, sitting on that sofa. It looks very nice and curvy, but believe me, it's made of plastic and not very comfortable. So as in, sitting in with everything else that Dali did, he tried to make a lot of money. So he himself said he had this pure, vertical, mystical, gothic love for cash. He made jewelry, clothes, furniture. He even did window dressing for, famous department stores. Wrote plays, made movies. There are some of his movies, short movies on YouTube, surrealistic movies, which don't make any sense whatsoever. I don't think he was a very good movie maker, as much as he was a painter. About window dressing, he dressed a window, I think in Saks Fifth Avenue or somewhere. And soon after, when he went there, he saw that they had changed it. And he was so annoyed that he pushed one whole sofa set through that window dressing and smashed the glass panes. So if you ask him to window dress, then you better not change it anytime in the near future. That's all about Dali, really. I just have one more slide to show you. Pretty much everybody has seen Mona Lisa, right? Hello?
Yeah, yeah.
Everybody seen Mona Lisa and the Louvre?
Yes, yes.
Yes. Anybody notice the painting on the opposite wall from Mona Lisa? Were you all impressed with the Mona Lisa? Let me ask you that first.
Now that's a very leading question you're asking.
Among other things, you can't get close enough to see it because all the Japanese artists are taking pictures busily.
So how big do you think it was?
Tiny.
Tiny, yeah. So for those who haven't actually seen the Mona Lisa, it's a huge thing in our heads. It's a tiny little painting hanging on the wall there. And I honestly felt it was a complete letdown. And like Murli sir is saying that you can't even get close. I just got a little close to get a tiny selfie and I was out of there. But then I turned around and I saw this.
Yeah, this we've seen.
It's opposite the Mona Lisa.
Correct.
Exactly opposite the Mona Lisa. So I initially thought it was the Last Supper. It's not. It's called the Wedding at Cana. And it is a time when he turned water into wine. And I said, to hell with Mona Lisa. I stood there and watched all the details of the Wedding at Cana. This is the painting which hangs opposite Mona Lisa in the Louvre. He turned water into wine. While I'm saying that, I'll just give you this little, I'll tell you this little joke as well. You know, back when St. Thomas was out on in his conversion drive, he came and landed up in Kerala, as you know. And he went and he's trying to convert people and not finding very many takers. He said, Jesus walked on water. He said, yeah, all right, whatever. He raised this guy from the dead. Oh, really? Okay, fine, whatever. Then he said he turned water into wine and 30% of Malayalis became Christians. That's the story. So I shall stop my screen sharing.
Your video.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, nice, Hema. Very nice. As usual.
Like the exhibit.
Okay, Prasad gets his first shot.
Lovely presentation.
For many of you who are Dali fans, this is my icon on Netflix.
Oh,
Netflix
wow.
allows you to watching.
Yeah.
And based on the Spanish serial called Movie Heist, where mask is used, Money Heist.
Money Heist.
Yeah.
The serial is a favorite and Dali is a favorite, so that's my icon on Netflix. But on a more serious note, the quotation that you put out left me wondering because it doesn't reek of arrogance, it doesn't reek of conceit. It's something more. It seems to be more gentle, but yet there is a sense of saying, telling the world, I'm God's gift to the world.
I never actually thought of him as arrogant or conceited. I've only ever thought of him as somebody not of this world, you know. He's just so barking crazy, poor fellow, you know.
But yet, if you read that quotation that you put out,
I think of the people who see his painting, you forgive him for saying that. And like, you're okay with that.
Forgive him. I love him for saying that.
Exactly. Yeah, I quite liked it.
I had a creative director called Kamlesh Pandey. How many of you know of him? I don't know. He's extremely talented, used to think in Hindi and did some of the finest English print campaigns in the 70s and 80s. He was a Rajneeshi, very dear friend of mine. Went on to Hollywood after leading Zee TV for many years and wrote many Bollywood scripts like Saudagar, Ilu, all kinds of popular Hindi stuff he wrote. I once opened a book sitting with him in his house, and it was a lovely book. I said, hey, Kamlesh, can I see this book? He said, yeah. And I opened the first page. It said, to Kamlesh, from Kamlesh, for being Kamlesh. So that was Dali all over it.
So
there's no doubt that Dali was one of the most self-confident, but also there's a certain insecurity in him that makes him want to project himself. And he managed to fight with all his previous collaborators. Yeah. So
I thought he was more insecure than... Yeah, sorry.
Andre Breton, whom you referred to, at the end of his life called him Avida Dollars, which is a an anagram of his name, Salvador Dali, but also means greedy for dollars. So he actually fell out with the surrealists, though they started it, Breton started it, but he probably is the most iconic figure and made the surrealists famous.
Yes.
It wouldn't really have had the impact without Dali.
Yes, and I mean, like for lay people like us who haven't like actually looked that deep into surrealism. In fact, when Shibu was telling me, and I actually started looking at Magritte paintings, because Magritte is your favorite surrealist, right? So I only knew of Dali as a connection with surrealism. I never even knew Magritte. So then I looked up one of the paintings, and I immediately saw the painting, which I used to call as the man in the bowler hat, but apparently it's father and son, right?
There are many with bowler hats, and one of them features in the Thomas Crown affair.
I know. Today I showed Shibu that clipping. I just love that scene where there is the music going on, and there is like several guys with bowler hats walking around. That's a brilliant scene and brilliant movie.
Very slick film.
Yeah. So I only knew of that, but I didn't even know that it's René Magritte. And while on the subject of René Magritte, people who you guys can look up. Sir, what is that painting with the street lamp and the dark?
So there's one called the Empire of Light.
Empire of Light. It's just so visually challenging. You'll see just a beautiful picture, and then when you look at it closer, you will see several things wrong in it. But ultimately, it's right. It's just
absolutely.
And it looks more like a photograph, unlike
that. It does. Yes.
It's just like a photograph. But then in the Berlin exhibition, weren't you disappointed? I was so disappointed.
No.
The curation is so bad. I had just seen the Magritte exhibition in San Francisco. It is one of the most beautifully curated exhibitions I've seen in my life. And then when we came to Berlin, I insisted on seeing this. And the lady at the ticket counter kind of told me that the curation is not good. I went up and I was disappointed.
Yeah, I can see where you come from, because I think I've never seen a Magritte exhibition. I wasn't even aware of him except for the man in the bowler hat, So, and I can imagine that visually Magritte's would be so much more pleasing to the eye than Dali's. But in the Berlin exhibition of Dali's, it's all in chapters. Like, for instance, he did a whole series of paintings for the play Carmen. And that is all in one room. So it is all curated that way. And most of his pictures were small, about A4 size ones. And there is I thought it was actually curated pretty well, because each room was one theme, a play or a event or a movie.
Of his chocolate watches and one of those typical Dali. It has more of his sketches.
Yeah, a lot of his sketches, and I thought his sketches were very, very intimate. And in fact, I saw Berlin even before I saw Figueres. So that was my first Dali exhibition that I saw. I mean, I guess, see, one thing about appreciating and looking at art is the whole thing has to click. How you are there, with whom you are there, how much time you have, your own mood, for instance. Berlin was a great time for me. 3 days, fantastic trip. And I just loved it immensely.
So I have a funny story here. So it has to click, you said, na, Hema? So in Rohini's continuing attempt to educate me in the ways of the world, she took me to this, we go to Florida, and Florida, I think, is all about beach and babes. And now she takes me to the Salvador Dali Museum. And she decides to spend that extra $1. And there's this usher and a group of 2-3, must be Japs, Murli. So we all go together. And then this man, he points to something, and then he uses the word cubism in art. So everybody is asking questions. I also said I must ask some questions. So I said, "Whoa, something like Rubik Cube." Everybody had a laugh. So I said, "Okay, man." I felt a little small. I said, "Now keep quiet, Ravi." But here is the interesting thing that happened. At the end of the show, when we were going and thanking everybody, he says, called me aside, elderly man, said, "Come here. and he points at me to a counter and he says, look at that. And he showed me this. He said, you're not the first person who confuses cubism, but there is a connection. He says, this is about disintegration and abstract, right? So if you look at it, that's your one,
memory,
right?
Memory, persistence of memory.
That's, so there are 9 paintings. He says, if you can connect cubes, you have understood what cubism is all about. So I had the last laugh and I told you guys brought
I wanted to say that cubism gets its name from, the statement, in nature you must see the cone, the cube, and the sphere. Okay, which is the basis of cubism. So you are absolutely right.
So that was my encounter with that.
In fact, in fact, in Berlin, one of my friends, he came with me and he had no idea who Dali is. So he's a Berliner, so he was there with me and he didn't know. So imagine to somebody who doesn't even know who Dali is and I haul him around that. So he came out a convert. So, all it was like a time well spent for me. Yeah.
So Prasad being a film buff, Dali designed the sets for Hitchcock's Spellbound.
Yes.
Dream sequence is completely Dali's.
Yeah.
So I mean, he's done a lot. I mean, he's an amazing guy. But the basis of surrealism is they want you to explore your unconsciousness, and what you do just comes out from your unconscious. That's why those are doodles, and they're so complex. I mean, you need to be a convert to really appreciate the craziness of Dali. But I think he's a very interesting guy, extremely interesting. It's just that he hits you in the face, whereas Margaret, you have to explore to understand it, or to go into his life. And that's why I prefer. I think Dali is in your face. Margaret is a little more subtle. But both are great painters, absolutely great painters.
Yeah, so Freud, actually, I forgot to say about that.
Extremely skilled. Anybody who thinks that the modern painters are not skilled should see these guys. They're extremely skilled.
Every line is in place. It's those sketches, even those busy sketches, you can spend half an hour on that busy sketch and see so many things that you have not noticed. And half an hour later, you come and you'll see another few new things. So about this, what Sir said, surrealism, I forgot to mention, Freud. Freud was a huge inspiration. So they all started exploring their art and getting all these pictures because of the theories of Sigmund Freud. So another big influence on his life. Both Picasso and Sigmund Freud, both were huge influences.
Incidentally, when Freud met Dali, or Dali met Freud, Freud is supposed to have said, when I look at the great master, the classics, I look for the unconscious, and when I see you all, I look for the conscience. Whereas it's supposed to be exactly the opposite.
And he's also supposed to have said to his colleagues, that guy, that boy is crazy or something like that. Freud about Dali. Dali was, I think, a young lad, 28 or so, thereabouts, when Freud was on in his years. Yeah.
So thank you.
Excellent.
Awesome.
So let's hear about Sherlock.
Very nice. Thank you, Hema.
Okay, wonderful. So do you want to do it today, or you guys have time?
Yeah.
We can.
Yeah,
I think, okay. Okay, so let me share my screen then.
Rice, Faluda.
Okay. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Just the slide, right?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see how this works. All right. Okay. So this is basically about a real life Sherlock Holmes, who's actually an Inspector Richard Reid, and how he was actually the beginning of the first detective force in India, and more specifically in Calcutta. So that's what this talk is about. And I have to say that most of my information came from these two articles, which I had read and which got me interested. And then I looked up his book, which is also available online. So in the initial days of policing in India, basically most of the crimes were, especially the murders, were basically gang fights or fights amongst groups of people, such as political feuds or family feuds or just drunken brawls. So essentially policing meant just brute force and muscle. There was nothing much of the finer detection, such as what we used to see in the Sherlock Holmes books or the Poirot. So all of us, I mean, at least I grew up reading lots of Sherlock Holmes and Hercule Poirot, Agatha Christie, all those usual detective novels. So because I'm so fond of Holmes, whenever this title of Holmes comes up in any literature, it seems to pop up, and Google obviously immediately brings it to my attention. So that's how I came across this. And what I found was very interesting and a curious story of about how the Calcutta Commissionerate of Police, which is actually the oldest in Asia. So the oldest police commissionerate is the Calcutta Commissionerate, because obviously it was the initial capital of the British in India. And so the way it transformed from kind of basic police force of brawn and muscle to a more a force which involved detection and crime solving and those kind of things started off or was triggered off by a sensational murder which occurred in the wee hours of All Fools Day in 1968. And this would literally change how the police worked. And Inspector Richard Reid was the man who led this transformation. And this is actually the first case in which evidence photography was used in India. So let's look at it in a little more detail about what happened. So this case is called the Amherst Street murder. And a beautiful young woman was found with her throat slashed near the Amherst Street police station. So the night constable, around 3 a.m., he was doing his rounds in the lanes around the Amherst Street, and he saw a pool of blood, and next to it, what looked like a pile of clothes. When he went closer and looked at it, he found that it was actually a sari which was draped around a woman whose throat had been slashed completely. And on looking closer, the next day when the inspector looked around and tried to identify her, they found there was nothing to show who it was. There was a ring on her right hand which suggested that probably she was a Christian and that she was married. However, it was strange that even after they announced the death, nobody came forward to identify her. So they were a bit puzzled about who this person was. So in those days, things were photography was pretty much in its infancy. But fortunately for them, the very next day, the entire scene, the body, everything was photographed. And because within a few days, the body started decomposing, although it was kept in the mortuary, it had to be disposed of. And so nobody subsequently could identify it. But this photograph was available, and so they could use that subsequently. Anyway, once for the first few days, almost 8 to 10 days passed and nobody came forward, and it started becoming a big news story. So there's this young, beautiful lady murdered, and the newspapers took it to town. It started becoming the talk of the town, be it in the English markets or the English houses, the posh houses, or the Indian markets and the lower houses in those days. So wherever it was, the main topic of conversation everywhere was, what the hell are the police doing? It's so many days since this murder has taken place. And not only that, prior to this murder, there had been 5 other women who had been murdered in the streets. So everybody was up in arms. So, and the police didn't know what to do. So who was the killer? When would he be caught? Why are the police so efficient? These all became the big talk of the town. And that obviously made the police commissioner, Stuart Saunders Hogg, very worried. In a letter to his deputy, the way he writes, he was literally seething at the inefficiency of his men and was naturally worried that it might reflect poorly on his leadership and the efficiency of the entire police commissionerate of Calcutta. So he decided that it's probably the time was right to put detective force in place. Prior to this, actually, when the Calcutta Commissionerate itself was set up in 1956, there was a suggestion that a detective force should be started off along with that. But the Governor General at that time shot it down, and so this wasn't in place. And Commissioner Hogg now felt that it was time that some specific group of people should be tasked with the job of investigating complicated and unresolved cases. And that point of time is when Inspector Richard Reid came into the picture. So he was, there's not much information about who he was prior to this time, but he was known to be a very efficient police officer. And that's why Commissioner Hogg gave him this task. And so when so the first thing he did obviously was to look at the photograph, and then he decided, okay, this is good enough to try and at least, first of all, identify this lady. So, in fact, he hadn't even seen this woman really. And from the photograph, he realized that, and the description of the scene, he realized that the woman's feet were quite clean. So he felt this meant, and they were without any kind of footwear. So he felt that this meant that she has not walked too far without chappals, and she probably lives somewhere in that area. And he decided that let's go and physically show this photograph to all the houses around here. And so this is a current day picture of that area. And so this one is where this body was found on Amherst Street. And near that, in this Baitakana area, there was one Mr. Harris who finally identified this lady as a person who stayed in his godown. And then they found out, and yet her name was not quite clear. But when Mr. Harris identified it, and a nearby the street policeman, he said that he knew the person who had brought her to Mr. Harris and introduced her. And this chap was Madhub Chandar Dutt, who had a shop in Bau Bazaar, which was again nearby. So immediately the cops went up and rounded up this Madhub Chandar Dutt and asked him about this woman. He immediately denied any knowledge of this woman, but obviously that didn't work for long. And finally, he confessed that yes, he did bring her to Mr. Harris. And the story he said was that this lady, Rose Brown, actually stayed in another place called Zigzag Lane prior to coming here, in a house owned by a Mr. Rosario. So the police then went to Mr. Rosario's house, and they found that this lady, Rose Brown, an Anglo-Indian, had come there a couple of months back. And as soon as she moved into that house, she had given jewelry worth almost 600 or 700 rupees, which in those days is quite a big amount, over to Mrs. Rosario for safekeeping. And this Madhub Chandar Dutt knew about this story. So a few days, this Dutt later says that a few days after, about 2 months after this, he used to keep frequently visiting Rose. And at that point, Rose told him that she had to get away from this place because her husband, one Mr. Kingsley, apparently wanted to kill her because she had left him. And she had seen him in a nearby pub. So Rose wanted to run away from that house and asked Madhuk Chandar to take her somewhere else. And that's why Madhuk Chandar had brought her to this Mr. Harris and introduced him there. After that, Madhuk Chandar says he doesn't know what happened to her, how she died. None of this he knows. So now the police go through all the contents of the house where she was staying in the go down. And there they found a photograph of a known offender. His name was Kingsley. And this fitted in with what Madhuk Chandar had said. So then they go and round up Kingsley. And when after Kingsley is arrested, they so meanwhile, another thing was that when the police had gone to her house, they found that the door could be easily opened, and it didn't look like the bed had been slept in. So that meant that that night she must have gone out early, and it seemed curious that she had not locked the house. So when they went to Kingsley's house, they found several interesting things. One was a blood-stained woman's garment. The other thing was the key to Rose's house. The third thing was a shirt, and the sleeves of that shirt were wet. Now this immediately brought to mind the fact that the surgeon who had autopsied the body had said that the body was the neck was sliced probably from behind with a knife, and so the person's arm must have gone across and the blood would have spurted when the carotid arteries were cut. So this suggested to Inspector Reid that probably the gushing blood would have made the sleeves blood stained, and somebody may have washed the sleeves to clean it up. When Kingsley was questioned about the woman's garments which were blood stained, he said it belonged to his girlfriend Maria, who's now left. Then the police traced Maria. Initially, they didn't explain to her why they were asking these questions, but they asked Maria, do you know anything about Kingsley's whereabouts on the night of March 31st, the day before this body was found? Did he come home? So Maria says, no, he was out all night. But the very next day, she turns her story around and says, no, he was around and he had come. And so once again, they were in a bit of a confusion about what exactly happened. But basically, what it all boiled down to, according to Reid, was that probably Kingsley had murdered this lady and then escaped, trying to get the jewelry. Of course, finally, none of this could be completely resolved, and the case was unsolved as to whether it was Madhuk Chandar Dutt or Kingsley who murdered, because at that time, forensics, DNA, all those kind of things were not available, and further details could not be elicited once everybody turned their story around. So when all this was happening, the newspapers were still full of news about this and arguments about this. And on June 5th, couple of months after the murder, a reward of 1,000 rupees was put for information leading to the conviction of the murderer of Rose, not to the murder. So, but the newspapers, the editor said, this is too late now. What is the point? Nobody is going to give any information so late. We won't ever find this. And they were right. This case was never resolved. And the editor commented, how many such cases does the government of Bengal want to happen before they act? And this is what prodded them to ultimately open the detective department in 1868. So on 1st November 1868, the detective department in Calcutta was started, and it continues to this day. Reid himself was a very successful. So Reid joins the detective department as the first inspector. There were only two people, the superintendent and the inspector. And Reid was a very successful detective. He had extremely good powers of observation and analysis. In fact, he was, because of this, he was even put appointed as the bodyguard to the Prince of Wales when he visited Calcutta in 1875. And over a period of several years, he solved numerous cases of all kinds of things and also trained many batches of detectives in these principles. He was, in fact, supposed to be the conscience keeper and advisor of the Commissioner of Calcutta. And all in all, proved to be a very efficient person who, in 1973, took over as the superintendent and head of the detective department. In 79, after he retired, he started putting together all these stories and he started publishing them. So that in 1887, he brought out this book, Every Man His Own Detective. And this brings together a variety of stories of various criminals that he has caught, how he caught them, what are the things required to find them, identify them. And this is actually available on the net from the archives. There's a Indian archives and it's the PDF copy is there. So if anybody is interested in reading it, you can download it and read it. And one of the ways, one of the things he believed in was physiognomy. So in this, his book, in fact, starts off with that. And he says it's more about identifying a crooked person by looking at his facial expressions. He says that an intelligent and observant detective should be able to identify a criminal just by looking at the face and the expressions. In fact, and he gives various stories about this. And one of the stories is about one Colonel Byrne, who's came to him one day complaining that a big box containing money, which had not been deposited at the bank, had been looted from his home. And so Reid goes to the house and he finds that room in a mess. The locker is open and it seems to be pried open by a kind of pitchfork kind of thing, which was in the house itself. So this made Reid think that this was probably somebody in the house itself. No professional burglar, he felt, is going to come to a home to burgle it without some kind of good equipment to pry open lockers and things like that. So the fact that a homemade instrument from that house was used made him suspect the servants in that house. So he had he brought all the servants and lined them up. So 30 Indians were lined up and he walks past them and looks at each person's face. And he describes in this book how when he reached the Sardar of the bearers, this guy just refused to look at him eye to eye. He refused to make eye contact. No matter which position he changed his body and stood in front of him, this guy would just turn his eyes away. We would look away. So then Reid walks on, he finishes the entire lineup and then comes back. Again, this guy and as he turns, he notices that this is the only person who is following him, who's looking at him. All the others were staring straight ahead. So he comes back to him and he tells Colonel Byrne that this is your thief. As soon as he hears this Sardar, he immediately drops down to his knees and he begs the colonel, please, I'm sorry I did this. I'll give you all the money. I'll return what I took. So Reid catches him, takes him, and he asks him where. He tells his police guys to take him and find out where he has stashed the money. So as he's going away, this Sardar realizes that he's done the wrong thing. He shouldn't have confessed. And then he changes his story and he says, no, I don't know anything about it. And I didn't take it. I was afraid. And so that's why I said this. And Reid comes back to him and he says, okay, tell me, where were you last night? Where did you go after this? So he says he went to his brother's house. So then Reid goes to the brother's house and this Sardar is made to stand far away. And he tells the brother, look, I know your brother came here and I want to see the bundle that he gave you yesterday. He's told us everything about it. And if you try to hide it, then you're also going to be arrested. So so the brother thinks that all this has happened and he immediately brings the bundle and shows it to him. And that's how he recovers the money which was lost. So these are the kind of techniques he used to use to complete his close his cases. And subsequently, he wrote several books, including these titles, over the course of the next few years, and published all of them too. But coming back to this every man his own detective, one thing that it highlights is the kind of crimes the police were solved. They were predominantly white man's crimes. So they were not interested in what happened to the Indians. But it does show how, although criminology was nascent, how he used the ideas of observation, forensics, deduction to reach at various conclusions. The other thing it highlights is how many of the societal evils in those days, such as infant killing by unwed mothers, by putting ash in the mouths of the infants, illegal abortion deaths, were all sort of things which were accepted by society. And he says that everybody in the family or the community was aware of what was involved and what happened. And in fact, because of this, the district commissioners would actually prefer to look the other way in such killings. And so none of them ever really got solved. And because he was such a good teacher, he also described stories in which he himself has been made a fool of. And one of them I'll relate here before I finish. And this is a story of an informer who comes to him asking for a police informer. So he brings a letter which has been endorsed by the commissioner, the deputy commissioner, saying, Mr. Reid, please give this person a job as a police informer if you think he's any good. So Reid looks at this guy and he sees a kind of small, shifty-eyed kind of guy who really seems to be no good. But now he's standing here with the obviously deputy commissioner's orders, so he gives him a job as an informer. And this guy says, I'll help you solve there's been a recent spate of robberies in this area. I'll help you solve that by going undercover there, and I'll get you the information. But before that, I have two conditions. When I'm walking around in the night, I want your police not to question me or harass me. So because I have to walk around freely and pretend to be a thief and, mingle with these thieves to identify the problem. Second thing is I need some subsistence allowance. So give me some money. So Reid says, okay, fine. And he does that. So a week passes, 2 weeks passes, no news of this fellow. So then he comes back and he gives a long story of how he's been tracing the thieves and he's got it almost nailed down and he just needs to find the loot. And he tells Reid himself, how important it is to get the loot. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to convict these burglars. So Reid says, okay. Then he says, can I have some more subsistence allowance because I need to get through another week. I'll be back next week. So Reid agrees. He goes away again. And another couple of weeks pass, no news. Then Reid sends a cop, hauls him in, and he says, what's happening? He says, tomorrow is the day. It's going to be done. And the next day he gets news that from a nearby house, a huge amount of loot has been burgled. And one thing he had noticed earlier on when during his meetings was this thief had only 4 toes on 1 foot. And when he goes to this house, on the stairs, every alternate step were these 4 toes. So this guy had made a complete fool of Reid, took his money and got away with the loot. So he describes that story too. And finally, this book ends with 26 maxims. And of that, one thing I'll tell you. So the maxim number 3, never mind what a man's virtues are, waste no time in learning them. Let his vices be to you what the Greek authors should be to the academician, a study by day and a dream by night. So that's what he suggests to budding detectives. Okay, thank you for bearing with me. And that's the end of my little story.
Thank you. Awesome.
Let me stop sharing.
Very nice.
Okay.
That was awesome, Shibu.
Awesome, huh? Very good.
A full revelation. Having lived in Calcutta during the 60s, 100 years before that, if Reid had happened, we should have all heard about it. But it appears to me that the two literary icons in detective in this country, Feluda of Satyajit Ray and Byomkesh Bakshi, are all inspired by the existence of a detective force part of the country. I mean, now it falls into place. I always used to wonder, why aren't there such powerful literary characters who are fictional, but who almost seem like your police commissioner? Joy Feluda, if all of you have seen Ray's films of Feluda or Byomkesh Bakshi, which in fact became very popular. Maybe this is the reason. I mean, they had a culture of an original detective department.
Could be. That could be the reason why it began over there.
I was just going to talk of Joy Feluda and the popularity of his popularity in Calcutta.
That's good. That'll be good to hear.
Wonderful.
Didn't the map make you very nostalgic reading all the names? Especially what got me was Narkel Danga, of all things.
At the beginning of the COVID epidemic, this Center for Biological Research and Genetics, they made an indigenously developed test for COVID, and they called it Feluda.
Yeah.
I know that correct.
That was sponsored by the Atlas.
Okay. Yes. That's true. In fact, when I was first thinking of the story, I was thinking of discussing all these other detectives also, but this itself became such a big thing that I just focused on that.
Wonderful.
Really lovely evening. Both the
Thank you.
presentations
Lovely
were
evening.
Thank you very much. Wonderful session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alithia.
Okay, on a closing note, we need to have more volunteers for talk. Every time we cannot just go out and grab aliens. There are so many people here whose turn it is coming up to make presentations.
I think we already have Bini next week. I think Murli Mohan also has got one coming up. Prasad's offered one. So I think a few coming down the line.
7th is booked for.
And then what about Ravi's friend also is on for 6th? 7th, yeah. Okay, that's great.
Good night.
So, but everybody start preparing for your next. Alithia, your turn coming up.
Just one.
Bini.
If photography is of interest, I have a very close friend, an ex-colleague who is an ace photographer. We could get him, especially, he does great job with lights or lack of it.
Wonderful. That'll be great.
Yeah, that'll be good. Let me
connect with him.
Sure. Absolutely.
He's a local,
okay.
So it should not be a problem.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, bye. Sorry to keep you so late.
Bye.
Good night. Bye.